Citlali is here, and with it, Barbara has taken yet another massive W. Barbara is a character that maybe isn't designed to be a DPS. Maybe that wasn't the intention with her gameplay, but she can do it. She really can. And you should be seeing footage of that on screen throughout this video. DPS Barbara wants a few things, but one of the biggest ones is a shield, or at least interruption resistance. And this is because of how difficult her stamina management is without it. This is Barbara's charge attack. Watch as the stamina goes down. As you can see, we were only able to do 5 of them. Now, her skill does actually decrease stamina consumption, so it helps a little. But it's still very stamina costly, and the skill comes with its own downsides of making it harder to do the next thing, which is consistently chain vaporize reactions. This is something you really want to do with Barbara, which, because, she can put out her charge attacks pretty fast, it's hard to get enough pyro application for this. You're basically going to want Xiangling's burst. It's not strictly the only way to do this. There's certain animo characters you can use that can play the role of off-field pyro applicator. In particular, Jean can do it quite consistently when paired with Bennett, thanks to the Sunfire interaction. But generally speaking, you're probably using Xiangling. And she also really wants Bennett, because she has quite low base attack. So an attack buffer like Bennett is already doing great for her, and Xiangling really appreciates another pyro to help with those energy requirements, because they are high, and Barbara does not generate any energy for teammates, unless you give her Favonius, which is going to significantly decrease her damage. What this means is that the Barbara Bennett Xiangling core is generally the main thing you're looking at when it comes to DPS Barbara setup. Had Malvika had enough pyro application to replace Xiangling, then that could potentially change, but unfortunately she does not. If you want to use Malvika with DPS Barbara, you're gonna need to basically wait a while to stagger her charge attacks, which isn't the end of the world, because stamina is gonna be her main bottleneck, more so than time. But it's not ideal. You really would prefer just using Xiangling. And because of all this, when looking for teammates for DPS Barbara, we come to that last slot, and which character is going to bring the most value to that last slot. But, as I mentioned, stamina is a big problem for Barbara, and she really wants a shielder or some form of interruption resistance. So, for most players, if you want to actually use her in practical gameplay instead of just nuke setups, you will likely want a character like that. So, in terms of the options you have, the main one that a lot of people are going to go for is Zhongli. He provides 20% resistance shred, he can give a 20% attack buff through tenacity, but his number one upside is just his shield is really strong. You can face tank almost anything, provided it's not doing a nasty reaction on you thanks to the pyro that Bennett inflicts. You have more free-to-play accessible 4-star options, so someone like Layla. Cryo application can potentially cause you to miss vapes, but it doesn't happen that much, and Layla has quite a strong shield. And you could even go for someone like Dia, who is bringing interruption resistance even if she's not directly bringing a shield. I also do want to mention Xianyun here, because Xianyun, by enabling Barbara to plunge, gets rid of the limitation of stamina, and hence it becomes way easier to play her without a shielder. But I kind of consider this a different archetype of team altogether. One of the most fun things about playing DPS Barbara for me is just seeing this charge attack hit stupidly big numbers. Seeing this plunge attack hit stupidly big numbers just isn't as satisfying to me. Because, well, you know, it's just kind of the normal plunge animation. Though, it's still absolutely a valid and effective thing you can do, because Xianyun is a very strong buffer on characters that like to do plunge attacks. But the character I've been using recently, and you'll know this if you saw my last video, is Xilonen, because I got her C1, and that gives interruption resistance. While Xilonen's buffing is really, really good, interruption resistance alone, if it's not 100%, is gonna feel a bit lacking. That's because catalyst characters, and bow characters, just ranged characters in general, have quite low poise. Basically meaning they get staggered easily, and Xilonen's interruption resistance boosting basically just will make them roughly equivalent to a melee character that doesn't have any interruption resistance boosts. Which is honestly a pretty big improvement, but it's not enough of an improvement to make this feel comfortable, right? Any instance of a dodge is less stamina for you to do charge attacks, which are your main source of damage. So it's not ideal, but somewhat workable, and is what I was using. Also, I'll briefly mention, like, Nahida is also a pretty good choice, even though she's shieldless. She brings a nice amount of things offensively. Danger application helps you get away with using the skill more easily to make vapes more consistent. She helps Barbara use Tome of Eternal Flow or Cash Flow Supervision better, which, when you can actually use these passives, become Barbara's best in slot. And you're adding in, you know, bits of burgeon damage, bits of burning damage. And so Nahida is nice in this slot, but even though being able to use Barbara's skill for lower stamina cost can help a bit, it's really not enough to compare to how comfy it is to have an actual shield. Problem is, the shielders, they don't bring that much to the table offensively, at least prior to Citlali. Zhongli is really your best shielder option offensively, but he really isn't doing that much. He's giving a universal 20% resistance shred, and you can run Tenacity on him, you can use Favonius to help the team's energy regeneration, and that's basically it. But with the recent addition of Citlali, that has changed. Now, it is worth saying Citlali's shield is not even close to the strength of Zhongli's. You will not be able to face tank whatever hits that, like, enemies in floor 12 bring you just with this shield. You will still have to sometimes strategically dash. You will have to try and position yourself to be out of the line of fire of enemies as much as you can, but the shield is still a very nice buffer, allowing you to take some hits without getting interrupted and save that precious stamina. But then on top of that, she is also providing the 20% resistance shred that Zhongli provides. She only does it for Pyro and Hydro, but that's not a problem, because guess which damage types this team is doing? Well, most of the damage is coming from Barbara and Xiangling, who are Hydro and Pyro. But then, on top of that, she can run the Scroll set, which gives you a 40% damage bonus to any element involved in a reaction that she does. So if she triggers a freeze reaction, and this does not have to be on a freezable enemy, it can be on a boss which can't be frozen and will still count as having triggered a freeze reaction and getting you that 40% damage bonus. So what that means is that instead of the 20% attack from Tenacity that you'd get from Zhongli, which, considering that a lot of your attack comes from Bennett's buff, 20% of Barbara's base attack on top of that is just not that big of a boost. Comparatively, the 40% hydro damage bonus that you get from Citlali, now that is a much bigger increase. As I mentioned with Layla, the cryo application can occasionally mess up your vapes, but this is rare. And if you just like wait for like a second or two to let Xiangling overtake with pyro, then you'll be fine. You can then just go back to vaping as before, but even then it's rare. So while the fact that she does off-field cryo isn't ideal, it's fine. It doesn't ruin the team. So right from the get-go, when comparing C0 R0 Citlali to a Zhongli, she's already a nice upgrade. However, where the true power comes in, and look, I don't recommend pulling for signature weapons. I don't recommend pulling for constellations in general. I think you're usually going to have a better time, more fun, by pulling for new characters, but it's really down to the individual. And as I said in my video on diagonal investment, pulling for constellations or 5-star weapons for your supports can potentially benefit a good handful of teams. So it's not as though Citlali cons are a bad investment. If you want to make Barbara do crazy damage, D2R1 Citlali she's doing things. So on top of the things I just mentioned, Citlali's Constellation 1 gives you an additive damage boost equal to 200% of her elemental mastery. This is quite similar to how Shenhe's Icy Quills buffs work. It's quite similar to how Yunjin's buff to normal attacks works. It's quite similar to how Sijuin's buff to off-field skill damage works. Although in a sense, it's the opposite of Sijuin's, because while Sijuin's only applies to off-field skill damage, Citlali's only applies to on-field damage. Doesn't matter if it's skill or burst or normal attacks or whatever, but it's your on-fielders damage that will be increased. Which is good news for Barbara, because it means that Bennett and Xiangling won't steal too many of these stacks. You get essentially 16 of them. There are some situations where it might be a different number, but generally you get 16 of these stacks. Bennett will burst and skill to kind of steal 2 of them, because you do want to go into Citlali before Bennett, so that you can freeze the enemy to proc the scroll set on Citlali. You want to go Barbara, then Citlali, then Bennett, then Xiangling, and then back into Barbara, and you do your stuff. So Bennett will steal 2 of these stacks, and Xiangling will steal, some number. Kind of depends on like how quickly you swap out of her, but maybe around 5. If Xiangling steals 5, Barbara will get 9 of these stacks in total, and these stacks will be quite the nice boost to her damage. But what's really nice about them in particular is this is a damage boost that is not based on Barbara's attack, and therefore can make her do some pretty good damage even without Bennett's burst up. Similarly, this damage boost isn't based on Barbara's multipliers, which means even her low multiplier normal attacks can do some pretty good damage, rather than her only good source of damage being the charge attacks. This is a very nice quality of life increase, as it really helps improve her damage when she's not able to get as many charge attacks off due to stamina issues, and it helps you finish off a particular chamber in Abyss without using Bennett's burst, saving your energy for the next rotation. So it's a constellation that gives a nice damage increase and surprisingly good quality of life. But the Constellation 2 is where things really get quite crazy. On top of giving Citlali herself 125 elemental mastery, which will boost the strength of the damage boost from the C1, boost the strength of her shield as well, she also gives 250 elemental mastery to the active character. And because the majority of Barbara's damage on this team is getting vaporized. The majority of Barbara's damage scales with EM. So a whopping 250 EM buff to Barbara is really good. But that's not all, because this constellation has another effect. Instead of shredding the reservoir, the meaningful damage on this team, by 20%, you're now shredding it by 40%. So you not only have 250 EM, but also 40% res shred instead of 20%. And that's not even getting into her signature weapon, which is going to increase her EM even more, which strengthens the damage boost from her C1 and her shield. She gets 365 elemental mastery from this weapon, and the active character gets 28% damage bonus. So, Citlali at C2R1 is giving 28% damage bonus, 40% damage bonus for whichever elements are involved in your reaction, so in this case, Cryo and Hydro, as well as a shield that isn't super strong, but definitely better than nothing. This looks like 20% Pyro and Hydro res shred, but because of her C2, it's actually 40% Pyro and Hydro res shred, 250 elemental mastery, and flat damage boosts. That is a completely overloaded kit, and this is honestly kind of surreal for me as someone who has been playing Vape DPS Barbara for years now. I think it was back in like 2.5 or 2.6 that I started playing her. And the fact that we have now a character that, yes, you will need to save up quite a lot of Primo Gems for, and I do recommend saving. Don't spend money on this game, at least nothing more than like Welkin and Battle Pass. It's really terrible value for money. But if you're dedicated and you do save, buy Citlali's rerun, which admittedly might not be for a while because she's a cryo character, but we are getting Snezhnaya soon, so they can't keep the cryos locked up in the Fortress of Meripede for too much longer. I mean, we are at least getting Shenhe and Ganyu on the upcoming Chronicled Wish. But for me, as a Barbara main, this, as I said, it's surreal because I was just never expecting them to actually make a character with such an overloaded kit that benefits Barbara so much. It almost feels like she's a dedicated Barbara support. She's not. Barbara does not benefit from the off-field cryo app, and in fact, the off-field cryo application is more of a downside than it is an upside for Barbara. And there are other characters that benefit from basically all the same buffs that Citlali gives and the cryo application, especially Gaming, but a lot of Pyro DPSs in general. However, she feels specifically tailor-made for Barbara, even though she obviously wasn't, and I am just thrilled about that. It's amazing. Barbara is officially an overpowered DPS now if you pull for a C2R1 Citlali, and in defense of this team, you might think this is not very free-to-play friendly, and to be honest, yes, you would be right. However, keep in mind that if you have a team where all 4 characters are C0, R0, 5 stars, that requires you to pull for the same number of 5 stars that getting a C2 R1 Citlali does. And technically, Barbara is also on a 5-star weapon, so that's a 5th 5-star, but honestly, you really don't need a 5-star weapon on her. We don't have a synergistic 5-star weapon yet for this team. We have some that are decent, but basically just boil down to somewhat good stat sticks. If we get a 5-star catalyst that's truly very synergistic, that would be a really noticeable buff to this team. So there's still room up from here. There's still potential for this team to get even better. So there are ways I can see this team improving in the future, but it's kind of hard for me to imagine, and maybe I'll eat my words, but it's kind of hard for me to imagine Citlali as someone I would ever want to replace on this team, because her buffing profile is just that insane for Barbara. I am basically fully happy with this team, though I do wish her shield was a bit stronger. And honestly, this is great. Citlali is great. Barbara's great. I love that they have this wonderful synergy together. What do you think about Citlali's synergy with Barbara? Are there any other DPS Barbara mains out there that actually watched this video? If you are one, please let me know that I'm not alone. If you found this video entertaining or insightful, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more Barbara propaganda. Until next time.